Hey, good evening, everybody. How are you doing tonight, Lynda? So nice to meet one of my fellow South Africans.
Good evening. Hi.
Amazing. I was just talking to the producer before and saying, Lynda is my go-to person when I want to connect with Africa, going up north. And, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Lynda, like how you grew up in Africa and, why you have such an intense connection and love for the people. And, just tell us that angle of your story, please.
Yes, sure. Well, I was born into a colonial ruled Africa in it was called Rhodesia, Zimbabwe today. And I grew up in Zimbabwe. My mother had been as a Zambian from like 5-6 generations back. And I grew up with a love for Africa and always going out into all the beautiful places in Zimbabwe, growing up as a child into nature and that. I was raised, my mother was religious, so it was a Christian home. My father, he had a belief system he didn't really know what he kind of believed that there's something out there, but he didn't know what it was. So he never sort of pinned it down to a God. So I had very much the kind of upbringing where my mother would through religion and the Bible if I did something wrong, whereas my father would sort of sit me down and say to me, it's how you feel inside when you've done wrong to your sister, or how kids fight or whatever. And it was, I realize now obviously that with the critical thinking, he always taught me to look at things from different perspectives and to not just take people at face value. Don't just automatically think that you must respect people because they tell you things. You've got to earn their respect and they've got to earn yours. Some rules are made to be bent and broken, and you'll know which ones they are, and this kind of thing. So I had a very sort of both sides of it. And then obviously as I grew up, I always had questions about the Christianity, the religion. And I think I found that in common with everybody in Africa, and I'm sure it's the same for the rest of the world, everyone questions a little bit as kids. And you normally just put back in your place, and there's not much you can do as a child because it's the adults tell you this. You go and I remember my mother taking me once, she couldn't answer my questions, to a pastor at a local church after the service, and he sat with me out in the gardens with my mother sort of hovering, and I asked him all my questions. And I realized that even when I was asking him these questions, his answers didn't cut it with me either. But I realized that I had to just be polite. He was an adult, and that I would just have to make my own mind up when I left school. So we had to leave Zimbabwe, and it wasn't by choice, and because of after we stayed there after independence, and then we actually had to come to South Africa because it was the closest country next door. And I finished my schooling in South Africa, which I finished my last years of my schooling, and I came into a very religious South Africa with a lot of not just the English churches, but the Afrikaans churches as well, and which was like the Dutch churches, which were very strict and staunch, and into that community. And I was very much an outsider because I was, there's a split. A lot of people don't realize about it's not so bad now, a very definite split between the English-speaking descendants of the British and the Afrikaans-speaking, the descendants of the Boers, the Dutch. So I was already an outcast, but because I was a white-born African from what the South Africans called a black country, I was on an even lower level of their grading system because I wasn't only English, but I was from an African country, and I was closer to black people. So that was very, very difficult for me.
Yeah, you would immediately have been labeled a sympathizer and an Englishman on top of everything, so you were doubly you were doubly branded. That's
definitely. So it wasn't easy, but I finished my schooling, and then I studied and I went into the tourism industry, and I was here when I saw, the kind of the end of the 1994, the end of apartheid, and I just realized it was going to take such a long time, and I wasn't comfortable in South Africa. I've never really liked it because even today, it's very, very racist and people are very opinionated. And of course, the religion thing plays a huge role in that. So I took an opportunity to go to East Africa, and I ended up living there for about 14 years, and I was working in the hotel and travel industry. So I got to travel and live, and I traveled to lots of other African countries, and I worked for the same group in other countries, but my base was in Tanzania. So I've lived in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and South Africa, and it was just such a relief. And it was through that time there that I slowly, I had turned away from religion, and I was then, I guess you could say, agnostic. I believed that there was something out there, but I didn't know what it was, so I kind of didn't pin it down to anything. And then it was a few years later, I think we had just started getting the internet in East Africa, because we had very expensive internet connections with satellite phones and things. We actually had proper dial-up landline when I was in one of the towns, living in one of the towns. And I remember finding the Atheist Republic website. And that is actually where I started learning about being godless. And it's so funny because I was living in an area, with the Leakey's Olduvai Gorge site and all the, unlike Sturkfontein caves in South Africa. With a lot of people, I find, especially with the men here in Africa, it's through science that they realize that this whole God thing is not true. Whereas for me, it was the other way around. It was when I then discovered science and I realized about these amazing things that were being discovered in Africa. I thought, well, I don't know how people can believe the Bible, because if you need any physical proof or readings or teachings, just look at science. And my mind was blown away. It's not that I needed a confirmation that I was on the right track, but also with the whole thing with the we live on this continent where humankind began, and the amazing things.
Humanity,
exactly. And I've been able to visit a lot of these sites in East Africa and speak to people who knew the Leakeys and that, and it's been amazing. And to also just speak to the local people, and a lot of these local, very nomadic tribes that don't even speak any form of local language, like the Maasai tribe. And really integrate and get to know the people of East Africa, so I've always had a passion for Africa. I've been told in the past that I see Africa through rose-tinted glasses. I'm passionate about my continent, and I think that it's very badly represented. So got involved in these atheist groups, and I found that there was a lot of nastiness on the groups where people would shout at Christians and slam them down and really have arguments. And I just thought that wasn't really... I'm not a nasty person. I can't be horrible to people and shout. I will never complain in a restaurant about bad food or anything. So I found that hard. And I kind of then started drifting towards the humanist groups. Yeah. And what happens is I became connected through the Nigerian humanists, and the president of the Humanist Association of Nigeria, Mubarak Bala, an ex-Muslim, had... he had a history there of being targeted for being godless, and it was about a year or so after that he was actually arrested, and he is now serving a 24-year sentence for blasphemy. Well, not for making statements that they said would cause a public disturbance, and it was all to do with religion. So the thing is that through that I realized that there was not a lot of support in Nigeria. And I knew that there were humanist groups that I had connected with around Africa, and I decided to just try and get everybody on board to support Nigeria, because I thought if these laws, this is when he had been arrested and we didn't know where he was for 5 months, and the whole world was talking about it. And I just thought, if this starts happening in one country in Africa, especially a country like Nigeria, which has a lot of power on the continent with its wealth and its size, trading power, that it would be very, very bad for the whole of Africa long term. Yeah. And I just started getting hold of, I think I emailed every single humanist and atheist group I could find on the African continent, Sudan, Ethiopia, everywhere. And it actually, we've got 12 countries now of humanist leaders that came together over that. Yeah. And it's been 3 years now, and we have just formed such a close-knit community and realized that there are thousands and thousands of people that have left religion, that always felt like we did about religion as children, across Africa.
This is the thing. It's like, when I first started, I'm also joined into the Atheist Republic communities. And when I first joined, I was surprised to find that, like they say here in Africa, all atheists are old white men, and I was saying to myself, that cannot be true. That cannot be true. I've met countless African godless people who don't buy into that bullshit, because, from Mo in the north to JC in the south, religion has really fucked this continent over, and it's really robbed people of such a rich natural history. And like when you when people who have got their pulse on the continent tell you about these things, your jaw will drop, because
True.
I don't know, it's people talk about how we should always be true to ourselves, be true to our culture, remember our heritage, while still living in the presence. And religion has taken that away from African people in a very, very big way. And I don't know if you can maybe share your insight on that aspect of how religion just whitewashed African culture.
It has, absolutely. And unfortunately, well, the religion that we all know is from the British colonialists. And so it's the white god, it's the white, you worshipping the white man and obeying the white man and not questioning him kind of thing. And we know that the Christian missionaries were particularly cruel in the ways they tried to get people to convert. Well, it started in the 1800s with the transatlantic slave trade, with how the religion was used as a tool, and things that were observed here on the African continent were seen as being evil, and were told that people were worshipping a fake god amongst the Black African people. It was very much that they had to convert over to Christianity and be forced to give up their cultural ways. And that also carried on through with the missionaries. And the thing is that they would take people, they would look at things that were happening in Africa. Now, they didn't understand the culture here. So you would get people coming from the West, and we were not a primitive, downtrodden continent of people that needed to be taught things. The Black African people are extremely innovative. They had colonized and traveled around most of the Western world already and had developed incredible things. Our kingdoms have all been destroyed. The evidence of that, there were advanced writing systems in Africa. And if you just look at some of the things that we do know about, look at the quality of the artifacts, like the Benin artifacts from Nigeria. The craftsmanship is unmatched to this day. Look at the pyramids in Egypt. We're very advanced civilization of people, but not advanced as in how the West perceives advancement. So you would have, for example, a family of polygamy was practiced in Africa. It was something that worked. I've seen it in the remote nomadic tribes in East Africa, in the Serengeti areas, where a Maasai will have several wives. It wasn't a sordid thing. It wasn't like a big sex romp for in a bed. It was nothing like that. It was all to do with all the women having a husband and the women working together when the men were away as a community. It was also a time in Africa where we had no orphans, we had no such thing as affairs and AIDS and STDs and everything. It was a system that worked, but the missionaries came in, and it's been admitted now that their three goals were to colonize, Christianize, commercialize, because they wanted our mineral wealth. So they wanted obviously to get everybody under their control and divide and rule by splitting tribes, splitting countries, putting borders and fences between us, and with this whole religious thing as well. So things that people have been practicing forever were now being told they were sins. It's a sin. You've only got to have one wife. If you have a child and you don't get married in a Christian church with certificates and rings and everything, your child is a bastard, and you have to register your child's birth properly and have the child baptized. Otherwise, the child is not going to heaven. And it slowly was brought in. There was lots of trickery as well with diseases, perhaps because coming into contact with Europeans, they would bring, colds and common things with them. So then a whole tribe would get sick, and they would say, well, you're sick now because you're being cursed by our God because you don't believe in him. Now that you know about him and you don't follow and believe in him, this is what's happening. And then, of course, there would perhaps be some children in that died from it. they would then say, if you come over to Christianity, we'll save your tribe. And then they would maybe administer medicines to them, which I didn't know, because we were used to using natural medicines from that just grow natural vegetation around us. But of course, now that's this new strange disease, and they would be cured. They would say that God has shown you, if you trust him, you know, he's healed your children, they're not dying anymore. There was lots and lots of trickery. And then I know in South Africa, there were horrific accounts where they would put people into ditches and cover the ditches up for days. And they would go back and they would read Bible verses to them and show them pictures of Jesus and say, will you convert? Will you convert? We're not letting you out. And they would deprive them of food and water. Now, I think if I was a mother in those days and I was taken from my children, my young children, and thrown in a ditch for days, knowing that my children were frantic and my whole family was there with me or whatever, I think that after 3 days, I would have also admitted, I would have said, yes, I will, you know. So everything that was good in Africa about cultural beliefs and connection to nature, connection to animals, never taking before giving, and all the traditional cultural, spiritual practices that Africans had was made to be evil. Voodoo, but they made everything bad, evil, twisted every single thing around. And then, of course, with the removal of all our artifacts, the destruction of our kingdoms, and with the slave trade, we don't have a continuous history of what was truly believed. And the thing is that everybody thinks it's primitive.
It remains in oral tradition and in
exactly
in some cultures, because you know, there's a very rich tradition in African societies of storytelling as well, you know. So
that's right.
This cultural history, even though it gets diluted by generation as it goes, but you know, that's the you know, one of the main ways that the culture has survived is just through this oral tradition.
It is. And the thing, one person was always chosen to be the keeper. And it was said, and I've spoken to a lot of my friends here, the reason why they never wanted to record it is because they said, and it's so true, written words can be changed. Oral words can never be changed. That's why, and you know, Dean, from growing up in Africa, it's normally the elders or the respected members of the community. So they would be chosen from maybe a young age to start, they would be told the full history and culture. Almost a lifetime of learning. You would learn names, places. We didn't have dates and things, but events that had happened. By the time that person was an adult, they would know their cultural history inside out, and they would then choose someone to pass it on to as the elders. And the elders in Africa are very respected, the elderly people in the village, because traditionally they are never put into homes or they are always looked after by the community, the very young and the very old. And the way we feel there is that they are the closest to the ancestors, so they must be respected. They still have a living memory of our grandparents and great-grandparents.
It's so like the concept of an old age home is completely foreign to Africans.
It is terrible. Exactly. You protect your
nursery,
and
you know, like what's it? Nursery creches where you send your children. Old age homes, that's foreign. It's a concept that does not exist in African cultures.
Exactly, and you know that that you will be taking care of your parents when they get older, and nursing them and everything. But then you know you've still got many years of your life ahead, and it's very much. They say when an elderly person dies, a library, books, knowledge goes with them, so that has to be passed on to the next generation. But then with that was all disrupted with slavery, because people were pulled apart from families. They were split. They were sent to different plantations and things, and different countries. And then, of course, with colonialism as well, the families were split. People were put into, like in Kenya, into like concentration camps. All the men were forced into war. So the family unit was completely disrupted. Yeah. So now you have families where the person that held the cultural knowledge for that particular tribe or clan was enslaved or was killed or was never seen again. And now that person who has been trained so carefully over the years it's a broken link. It's a broken link, you see.
And so the history gets wintered, yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of our history is in our arts and carvings and things in Africa. Carvings on doorposts and actual carvings and special sticks that are passed down with family history on from generation to generation, and jewelry. And that was all taken from Africa. And it's all sitting in museums around the world right now. I mean, we've been drip-fed little bits of it back again.
I remember seeing, you know, as a young child, I remember seeing, I think it was East Africa, where they had these those massive wooden doors, where
Zanzibar, yes,
they do these intricate carvings. It's almost like you know, like we would look at you know, these picture novels where they used to tell stories in pictograms. You know, it's the same kind of artistry, but on a very, very detailed and high-end level. You know, like I was quite amazed. I remember.
You're right, and all the carvings in that in West Africa as well, because you would carve stories onto lampposts, and there were no photographs in those days, so a lot of the bronze figurines were of ancestors or people while they were still alive that were then kept as a reminder. That would be, you would pay honor to your ancestor. They would have shrines and things, because this was a replica. It's much like you would have photographs in your home today of parents and that are deceased. Yeah. You might light a candle there, and it's all been really misconstrued. And religion has unfortunately just taken off in Africa. We've got this huge movement of Pentecostal churches now. Some of our most wealthy men in Africa are our pastors. And there's so many people that are seeing through this whole thing and asking questions, and have always had questions. And they are, like we did, drifting away from organized religion and exploring other religions and things. And they are getting pulled into this supernatural witchcraft, money ritual kind of, and thinking that it's like we would traditionally call here your sangomas or your witch doctors, that are advertising these services on Facebook and advertising in, you know, online media and all sorts of things. Bring back your lost lover, make money, win the lottery, all this kind of thing. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that they're asked to do is to sacrifice someone. The belief is that you have to sacrifice someone that means a lot to you in order to get what you want. So we have had cases last year in Nigeria of young boys killing their mother and sacrificing their mother, and men killing their wives. And, you know, it's been absolutely horrific. And the problem is that it's just being allowed in the name of its cultural beliefs, its African beliefs. This is what, but it's not. It's all been misconstrued and turned around. It's like I say to people, any true person that has knowledge or connection to the old oral history and the true spiritual beliefs of African people here is not going to be advertising their services on Facebook and charging you for the service. If anything, you would have to travel to a remote village, and you would have to find out who the elder was in that village. And it's certainly not a case of like a shop where you queue up and book and you've got your money there to pay to have like your reading or your thing done. It's not like that at all. But people are just so confused, and people are cashing in on this as well. You know, the latest thing and it's been going on for a while in most African countries, is money rituals, where if you want lots of money, this is the thing, you sacrifice your mother. These children had their mother's head in a container next to them. You've got to sleep with a corpse next to you for so many days, and money will come out of the mouth. You know, you try and explain to people that it's impossible, because banknotes, well, in Africa, let's face it, there's a lot of, anyone can print banknotes in their backyard, but they're doing it with American dollars now. And we're saying, look, the Americans, they've got proper systems in place in their banks. Everything is marked and numbered. There's no ways that there would be American dollars, just thousands of dollars falling into people's mouths and that in Africa with the Reserve Bank about all this. You just won't happen. But people are caught up. And I don't know. I mean, Dean, if you just do a search, or anyone on Facebook, for money rituals Africa, you'll be shocked at the number of Facebook pages alone where they will actually, they all say no human sacrifice, you know, because everyone's now just the fact that that's saying, and Facebook just let those things run, whereas some of the things that we say we get warned for, which is very, but the thing is that it's happening and people are getting desperate. And we're having the pastors in our East and West African countries and here in South Africa, prayer for protection against Boko Haram, and then everybody goes to the big marquee tent, and of course they get prayed for, and everyone's giving money for protection, and then you'll get something that you got to wear that's you got to buy that you got to wear for protection, and they're just cashing in on it, and people are just falling for it, and it's just so sad to see.
Yeah, I think this is ultimately the thing that that is why I'm convinced that in addition to letting go of the of the imported religions, we Africans also need to cultivate that humanist element that is so deeply ingrained in our society. Because if you have humanism and non-religion as two of your core driving principles, you will immediately find that the charlatans and the people who like to prey on vulnerable victims, they stand out like a sore thumb.
Exactly.
When you apply those principles, because you're taking advantage of vulnerable people. That's something that just it sits wrong with me, no matter what's even when I was a believer in my youth, like injustice really didn't sit very well with me.
Exactly. There's no free choice.
Yeah, but that's the nature of I think ultimately I understand. I understand that that's the nature of humanity is like we are a species that will exploit and will be predatory, and it's time that we. I'm sorry, I'm just want to get my cat to stop the nonsense.
Mine are normally all around here as well. It's fine.
Sorry. She's attacking.
I've got a few watching me over there, but they know not to come. Have appeared on quite a few things I've done, tail walking past. If I'm too long, you see. So, no, but it's true, Dean, and it's really. I think that religion is keeping Africa suppressed and is actually dumbing down African people, because their minds are being filled with, and I say, and I'm very open about it, is that you're still enslaved if you are worshipping a white god and you are believing all that nonsense and not getting in touch with your true cultural roots. It's heartbreaking to see it. It really is, because I know the potential of the African people and the innovation and the way it's just all being taken by religion. And I look at how it's been used, and I will use South Africa as an example. When South Africa it's got its democracy, is that Nelson Mandela was brought out with the whole peace, love, and Ubuntu, a person as a person, through other people, the Rainbow Nation and everything. And he came out very religious, telling the Black South African people, you must forgive and move on. It's the right thing to do. And religion was used a lot with the Black South African and the white South African public. Forgive and forget. You can't just forgive and forget something that has been so horrific and brush it under the carpet and carry on building the Rainbow Nation. It will never work that way. It had to be dealt with and a way to sort things out. And I always thought it wasn't tackled properly. There are going to be problems years down the line, and sure enough, there are now. But the problem is that, and I saw it when F.W. de Klerk died a couple of years ago. For those of you who don't know, he was the last white president of South Africa. So many of my Black religious friends were saying, thank you, Jesus, now finally justice is served. And because they realized that he had never been brought to book for crimes against humanity or anything. He was given amnesty and just live his life normally like a normal person. But the Black people of South Africa were very upset that nothing was achieved through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and that, but they were told justice will come one day. So they were very happy that day that he died, because they thought that Now it's Judgment Day for him. He's down there where he belongs. And then, you know, they think, well, we've had our land taken away, but we have got the most amazing land coming to us one day in paradise. So it's been used as a pacifier for people. And that is what I'm absolutely against. I see it in Uganda as well, where there was a pastor after COVID where nobody had money to tithe because, you know, no one had been able to farm or anything. He was asking people to give the title deeds to their farms, their land, to him in place of tithing. So you give me the title deed for your land, then you don't have to pay tithes in the church for the whole year. He was guaranteeing people a double larger plot of land in heaven one day if they gave him the title deeds. There was one elderly man who did it. Thank goodness there were people of sound mind in the congregation, even though they were religious. Sorry, but they were, who reported it to the police, and they managed to get the guy's title deeds back. But this is happening in places that we don't hear about it, and people are being hoodwinked into doing things like this. And it's just shocking.
Sorry, on an aside, Lynda, what is Uganda's issue with LGBTQ?
Uganda's issue is their president, and I think he's also using it as a political tool. It's funny because we find that a lot of the LGBT community are godless.
Yeah.
And a lot of them in Kenya especially have said that having grown up in religion, they didn't want to leave it, but they realized how religion preaches one thing but can't accept them for who they are as another. And a lot of people left because of that. Now we find in West and East Africa that the atheist communities and the LGBT communities kind of stick together. And we try and help with the LGBT as much as possible because we are the two most ostracized groups.
Yeah. But the funny thing is in Uganda, it seems like they are, they more or less are filled with this refulgence towards, it's especially, especially pronounced I was just wondering if there's maybe a religious element to those anti-LGBTQ and homophobic people that have, because they, I've heard horror stories as well of them, going out and lynching people, and
it's horrific. And the thing that gets me is that you see everybody, what they say that homosexuality was brought here by the West to Africa. But they don't understand that it was here always. We've got picture. You've got things that are found in Egyptian tombs and things that have been found on rock paintings, and even the king of Buganda was a gay man, and there's lots of that in recorded history. So it's the big thing in Africa now, and especially in East Africa, in Uganda and Kenya, is it's a Western thing. You are enslaved to the West. But the irony is that all the people that are saying this are Christians. They're the ones that are getting married, and I actually thought about this the other day, and I am going to actually put, I'm going to do a little graphic and start putting it out there to drive my point home, because I just thought of it. It's all the Christians that are saying, that's a practice from the West. They're the ones worshipping the white Christian God still, and that are like, it's just so ridiculous. And my whole thing is,
the thing is, it's like on the one side, they like they're flip-flopping, because on the one side they say homosexuality is un-African, and then they're turning and they go into the church.
Exactly. Our Bible says here in the Bible. It's the irony of it, but people don't see it. And I can honestly say from the work I do in human rights, it's the LGBT, the community. You don't know who they are, but they are the most loving, kind, helpful, that are always there, and they are the ones that are going out and doing really good work in their communities. And we've had a whole lot of shows trying to dispel historically this whole African homosexuality thing. And also we've tried to do education with dispelling the myths that LGBT people abuse children and they rape other people. And, you know, we've really tried to do education on this.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the funny thing is, I interviewed a lady a while ago. Her name is Yemisi Ilasami she's from Nigeria, and she wrote this book as well. I don't remember the exact title, but it's along the lines of homosexuality is not un-African. And she went through all these, these pre-colonial stories
Yes.
that we're talking about that are passed down, and she said it's something that homophobia has been introduced by the Christian missionaries, and it's something that does not exist in African culture. To be phobic of gay people. We had a question earlier. I don't remember it. If there we go. Thanks, Wes. How is Christianity affecting the ways of the sangomas? These are like the local faith healers, and can you just tell us a little bit about the local sangoma tradition in Zulu culture and some of their practices?
Well, I wouldn't say that Christianity is really affecting it, because we have, they're called faith healers, but there are people in Africa. There's always been a lot that's been practiced, in fact, around the world as well, with natural medicines and herbs and things for cures, before vaccines and antibiotics and that. And the African way of healing somebody for an illness is not just treating it with something to take, but rather it's treating the whole self.
Holistic.
It's holistic. It is holistic, and it could be healing from touch and healing from, just emotionally issues and things. And it's also this. So it's that is now being misconstrued into all sorts of things. To become a sangoma or to practice the culture, to be a healer, it's a very normally you're chosen as a child to be that you show the qualities of being able to be taught this, or perhaps your mother or someone in your family was like that. So you have the talent to do that, the knowledge to do that. So that is something that is done over a person's lifetime. It's not a case of you just wake up, I want to be a sangoma, a witch doctor, and you do it. So it's very much, it's the passing on of traditional practices, which I think also to the Western world when they first came here would have been seen, they perceived that to be evil. And once again, it comes down to the whole question. You don't do things the same as me, so your way is wrong. That's evil. This was the whole thing. Just because someone is different to you doesn't mean that their way is wrong and your way is right. We've got to find a middle ground as human beings to accept people's differences. So this has now been like your overnight sangomas or people that will practice that will be called out because there's an evil spirit in your house or because you need a blessing for something. And what's also happening is that if there's bad luck in a village, like there's droughts and the crops suffer for a long time, or animals die, and it's also in some of our countries, people like women who fall pregnant when they are older, or people giving birth to twins, or children that are even born with something like epilepsy. That is then being taken as being a witch. The reason why all your crops are dying and hers didn't die is because she's the witch. Or children, hyperactive children, and like children with epilepsy. Twins are also in many parts of Africa seen as being a bad omen. If you have twins, bad luck will be brought on the village. These are things that have been twisted and carried down through the years as well. And it's very, very difficult trying to re-educate people. And Dean, I'm sure, and I was talking about this a while ago, even though we didn't grow up in Black tribal culture, as white Africans, we were also brought up with witchcraft as Christians. Because I still, if you see a hyena, it's a wild animal here. Automatically, the belief is, what is it? It's a witch.
Mm.
Am I right, Dean?
Yep.
It's a witch. The hyena is a witch that's transferred. And tell me, if you hear an owl on somebody's house sitting on the top of someone's house, it means death. You see, you know witchcraft as well. And my daughter's a teenager now, and the other day I caught her cutting her nails, wrapping them in toilet paper, and flushing them down the toilet. I said, "What on earth are you doing that for?" She said, "Do you do that too?" She said, "You taught me, Mom." I said, "I didn't teach you that." She said, "Oh, you did. You always used to do it when I was little, and you do it. And when you cut hair, same thing."
Yeah.
I said, "But you're not supposed to do that. Just throw them in the bin." Now, it was because I was raised by a Christian mother in Africa that you don't put your hair cuttings or nail clippings in the dustbin, because the witches will get them and make spells against you. Am I right? Or against?
Yeah.
So you see, you've also got that. But when you start pointing this out to people, and I was talking to white African friends, they were like, "Oh my goodness." And one of them was like, "And you can't shower when you're 5 months pregnant, when the moon is out." And we all were coming up with these things. So we have been raised with this also.
Yeah.
It's the same as now, as an ex-Christian for over 20 years, when I'm working with figures or numbers, whenever I see that combination 666, it's instant, and I go. Yeah. Now, if I've got to choose a number at 666, I'll go for it because I know. But just that split second.
Yeah. It runs very deep, eh?
It runs deep. Very deep. So you can imagine now people that are being brought up with deliberately limited education, and in some of our war-torn countries like the DRC and that, where people really are living hand to mouth and they can't even send their children to school because the kids are being kidnapped or the schools are burned down or whatever. You can honestly see how we are going backwards with this rather than forwards. If you can see, and I have spoken to people across Africa about these, like I say, you think you don't have witchcraft beliefs because you're white and were born into a Christian home, but we do, Dean, across Africa. And it's the same with the Indians and Coloreds and Asians and everybody who lives here. Where do those come from? We just know them. Everyone around us knows them. We all know people who say, "I'm going home for the weekend. I'm going to go and see the sangoma to sort out my love life," or whatever. It happens. Yeah. And we don't bat an eyelid. It's just become...
Something else that I wanted to get your take on is a lot of, these community leaders or, people who practice these spiritual, traditional African practices are, when they are accused of witchcraft, something goes wrong in the village, for example, a child gets killed in an accident, or maybe a crop is ruined because of some extreme weather condition, then, some person in the village is scapegoated as a bad actor and then all of a sudden accused of witchcraft. These people are then, attacked, sometimes killed, usually ostracized and kicked out of the village. That witchcraft allegation has a cultural element to it, but it's also then reinforced by the Christian values, especially, which have got this aversion to witches and things that are seen as dark and demonic. And I don't know, Dr. Leo Igwe does work especially on. They've got places in Nigeria where they actually rescue people who are charged or accused of witchcraft, because those people also need sanctuary, and usually it is older members of the community. People who are old that cannot, for example, look out for themselves anymore. People with mental health issues are sometimes also labeled as witches, and then this mob descends on them, and then they have all these weird things. I don't know if you can you can talk maybe on that.
Yes, we've had some recent incidents in Malawi last year. I don't know, it was terrible, where they were actually getting these two elderly ladies to dig their own graves, also because of things that had gone wrong in the village. But what is happening is that typically women outlive men, so there are a lot of widowers in the village that are very old, and they say that it's the younger generation of people as well that want them to die, to take land and cattle. They don't have much. They all might have a small home and a few cows and that. But when traditionally, especially your older school African people, and when their husbands are gone, they don't have protection really. They are very vulnerable. It's the same as how the elderly people are abused, even in hospitals and old age homes around the world. You often hear these stories coming up about people that are really badly treated or whose families just reject them. And of course, this is becoming more prevalent now in Africa as a lot of things change. So these elderly are targeted. And, you know, there are instances where perhaps a pastor will require payment to lift the curse on your village. And if the people don't have a lot, well, they can give him this, but then, well, they can give him one of the old lady's cows as well or something. So they're exploiting people. They really are. And it's terrible because we've had incidents. It was in Kenya, I think it was the year before last, where same thing, they chased 2 ladies and 2 men, and they actually burnt them at the stake. They literally, like, it's medieval times. Now, Dan's Odhiambo in Kenya, who's with Kenya Humanists Alliance, and he's also a really interesting person for you to have on the show because he gets involved with the actual victims. He is amazing. He does the same with the female genital mutilation and child brides. He not only has a sanctuary where he takes these women in to look after them, but he is also laying charges and standing with these women in courtrooms, and he is actually helping to get some of these people put behind bars. And I just think that's amazing, because if the churches are letting this kind of thing, you know, just carry on because it's all to do with religion and whatever, then we, the sane people in society, the humanists, need to take our stance on how we deal with justice. That is a crime. It's criminal. I don't care what anybody says. It's not right. And if you speak to people who don't take extreme versions of Islam and Christianity, even the religious people don't like it. The majority of them, they don't like what's happening. And it's putting cases through court. The problem is always they're pushed out of villages and they're not wanted back, you see, because you're a witch, you're bewitching, you have to get out. Now, they are then labeled a witch. They can't go anywhere. They don't have any money. They can't even run to a neighbor to help. Yeah. These are the people, they are elderly, they are frail, they are sick, they are in the prime of their lives where they should be protected, and they're not. Wonderful Makuchi in Malawi, from Malawi Humanists, is also doing wonderful work. He has taken, he did a newspaper article with him, with the 2 witches, and everyone thought he'd be cursed. Terrible things had happened to him. Nothing happened to him. But the only place that he found of safety was the prisons. Got permission from the local prison for these ladies to be locked in a cell. So they were now locked in a cell, which has also got all its own stigma about it. Yeah. They are now almost classed as being criminals. And Malawi have got a huge problem because they're trying to have witchcraft written into law as a criminal. Not people who, but if you're a witch, you will be tried. If you're found guilty of being a witch, you will be punished or imprisoned. Yeah. And
didn't Swaziland also have some witchcraft law or something a while ago? Sure, I remember reading something about broomsticks and witches. And
yes, there were lots of laws here, and I'm sure it's still in the South African. The colonialists put laws in against witchcraft. Now you find in Malawi, the president of Malawi and the whole crowd of government are all trying to get the laws changed so that witchcraft becomes a crime, a criminal offense, just like killing somebody or stealing. And Wonderful's argument was, but how can you convict someone with no evidence? Yeah. How are you going to prove? How can you prove something that doesn't exist, a supernatural? And it's very, very scary the way that people are, and then the whole country will start believing in witchcraft now because the president says so, and these laws are coming into place, and examples are made of people, and it's just oppressing people further, really. So it's very sad what's happening.
Yeah, I always feel, this is the bittersweet life in Africa. You know, it's one step forward and two steps back. One step forward and two steps back. But you know, I always say, you know, regardless of how slow the progress is, as long as there's a one step forward, you know, I don't mind the two setbacks. But you know, we're very resilient here in Africa. You know, like as long as I can see that there's at least one step forward, I'm happy. You know, like the two steps backwards, we can work on that. But
we're used to that in Africa. That's why we took it in our stride with COVID, because we're so used to making a plan. I really think we got on with it, and it was, you know, we coped and we were fine.
The whole world went to hell in a handbasket, and we would like.
Well, it is. I mean, even if everything was destroyed, we would just go to our national parks and we would be able to survive, because we've got everything we need in our wild areas with game and things that we can eat and medicines and shelters we can build. I think that would just be amazing. I would just love it if we could just all just disappear into because I think the biggest thing now is that also getting further and further away from African culture is everything. You know, it's the social media, it's TikTok, I joke and I say you don't even know who your members of parliament are, but find out. If you want to know who the latest housemates are in one of the Big Brother houses, everybody will know, and everyone will have an opinion on that. But people aren't aware of what's going on in their own countries. And it's all, you know, spending your time on your phone with selfies and everything, and it's all the fast food and all the fast-paced living. That is not the African way. And it's kind of, I say to my black single friends, you guys get a bonus or money and you buy the latest iPhone. You should be buying cattle. And if I want to know the weather from you, you got to check the weather app. People just don't. It's really, we are drifting further and further away. And I don't believe that it's a good thing. You know, they say the old-fashioned way is the best way, but it honestly is, because we had a lot less issues. We have adopted too much Western culture in Africa. That is the problem. It's not meant for African conditions and things. And then the people are really suffering now. And this religion thing is just, it's ongoing. It's dropping in the rest of the world, and it's increasing in Africa. It's very scary. But there are lots of godless people, as you say, Dean, and they are everywhere, especially in our Muslim communities.
Yeah. A couple of questions here. You know, are there still many of the traditional African religions or spiritual practices that are you know, practiced? And if so, are they are they genuine to the religion? How is it used to be? How was it used to be practiced? You know, so I think the question is trying to poke at pre-colonial traditions. You know, like with the traditional practices pre-colonialism. You know, do we have any idea what they were like? Is there a surviving history of that's told?
Well, we've got a lot of history from the Nubians, the Kush, Kemet, you know, Egypt. There's a lot of the Egyptian scrolls and a lot of things that the Bible has been taken off that. A lot of things in the Bible have been misconstrued and twisted and taken off original African preachings. Spiritual. When I talk about the African spirituality, it's not like a supernatural thing. It's more like knowledge, inner knowledge. And it's also, yes, there are places where it is traditional. There are still communities, like some remote tribes in East Africa. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but the ones that I know of that have been untouched by this because they have been in very remote parts of Africa. And, you know, they were obviously still affected by colonialism and that, but pretty much left to themselves. The people of Karamoja in Uganda and the Jacana people in Kenya, the Maasai people in Tanzania. Those are the tribes that you see now that are sadly being, like the Khoisan in South Africa, being targeted and are in the minority. I have a personal opinion that they are targeted and have always been targeted because they are the ones that are closest to the true African spiritual beliefs. So they must be eliminated. They don't want that surviving. And these people are diminishing in size. And of course, a lot of them speak languages that even, like, say, for example, in Tanzania, the language is Kiswahili, but they don't even speak Kiswahili. They speak some language, even a Maasai language that they won't understand. It is an ancient language that is only known by that group. And because they are being pushed off their land, they've had their land taken away from them. All our national parks and that around Africa have been fenced off, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Those are cultural, ancestral places. So when you hear about things like the famine in Sudan and all the horrible things happening, famine in Ethiopia, Africa gives us everything we wanted. We would never have been born into a place that couldn't provide for us food, animals, space, natural medicines, natural vegetables, water sources. Every part of Africa has been divided, and we've still got national parks that are the size of small countries. Yeah. We've got national parks the size of Switzerland and the UK that are just fenced off. Nobody's allowed in and out of those parks. They are very high prices to get into them. Those are tribal areas, the Kruger National Park as well in South Africa. And there's a lot of Iron Age settlements in that are hidden there, which proves that there were always people there. This whole theory of Africa being the empty land theory and people fighting for land, the African people practiced crop rotation according to the time of the year. So, you might go, and also the African people don't have plots and house numbers and settlements. Just because there's no houses on a land doesn't mean that it's not your land. Yeah. The African people had ancestral places where people were buried that they would never touch, because it was a spiritual place for them to go and connect with people who were buried there and pay their respects, which was taken as being empty land. So the thing is that people are being pushed off, and it's these nomadic tribes that are suffering the most. They're being pushed into barren areas where there is no way of them planting or having their own water sources or even livestock, or into refugee camps. They are becoming poverty-stricken and dying of famine and drought because they are being pushed and pushed and pushed. They're now given food aid. Then there's a shortage of food aid, and they're becoming reliant instead of being reliant on Africa and what give us. They're being exploited, and that, so it is practiced, yes, in small. It's not. I'm not saying you're going to find it in every city and every country and you have to look for those, and but there are definitely, yes, that are still being.
In conclusion, we also have a question from Jessica Taylor. This is actually very interesting because the albino community are very, very much hunted by
very much.
Their body parts. I don't know where this comes, where this particular belief comes from. I'm sure there's some spiritual or cultural element to it, but these people actually live in fear for their lives because they are the targets of we call them muti hunters, like the
that's right,
the people who they harvest, like they're actually like scores of people that go and just harvest these natural medicines from the fields. And traditionally they used to be very conscious of the environment, and they used to have a give and take kind of ecosystem.
Yes.
And lately it's become very commercialized, because people have seen that they can turn a quick buck, especially with a lot of migrant workers moving towards urbanized areas. Even the natural medicine industry has become industrialized more.
Yes.
So, any kind of African medicine or natural medicine has become a commodity. And, when in witchcraft rituals they use body parts of people born with albinism, then obviously these people are also going to be targeted by that illicit trade. And is this the same? This is the same going
throughout Africa.
It's not only a South African issue, is it?
It's everywhere, and it's in East Africa, as Jessica says, in Tanzania. There's whole communities of albinos that live, that are protected, but they are sought after, and I don't know whether it's because they are white and they believe that the white man, it's like closer to the white person, that it has some spiritual property, even in remote parts of East Africa. I would get called into villages when new children were born to hold the babies, to bless the babies, because if their baby was held by a white person, the child would have and I just said, guys, this is ridiculous. So when my daughter was born, I went to the village with her and I asked for the elders to come and hold her. Why? Because I want my daughter to be held by prominent elders in the village. Also for, it's this whole thing with the white Jesus and the white man. And I think it is that, but it's true. And the body parts of albinos are very, very sought after. And I know in Tanzania, they throw them, the belief is that you need to when you open a new mine shaft, like with the Tanzanite mining and that up there, you need to sacrifice. An albino child is the top priority. It's horrific. They will throw an albino child down a mine shaft first to bless the mine shaft before. And this was very prevalent. And this has been happening. I don't know if it's still as bad in Tanzania, but I know in the 90s and into the 2000s, it was still happening. And there again, what are our governments doing about it? Everybody knows it's happening. But the problem is that we find the police and lawyers, and they're nervous to deal with witchcraft cases because they're going to get cursed. So if you have an incident with 2 women being lynched in the village because they're witches, the police are very reluctant to go out there because they will be cursed. This is what they believe. And so the things like the albinos that are being targeted, they aren't really interested in. They don't want to protect them in their own communities because then they become targets because people are going to come. It's terrible. So it is, unfortunately, it's just commonly known here that people are targeted.
Yeah, besides, people keep on saying to me like, Dean, all we hear about is doom and gloom and poverty and filth and wretchedness and everything. Like, why do you still stay in Africa? It's like, there's a certain wealth of experience and just I don't know how you can describe it. Like, there's just a raw essence to this continent. Like that you have to experience it in person to know what we talk about, because besides all of the the poverty, the filth, the crime, the everything, like there's a raw beauty in the actual continent and in its people that once you experience it doesn't really let you go ever, and especially people who are born in Africa, like we feel very connected to it's a weird thing to say, like, I'm connected to the planet,
No, but you do. I mean, when you're out in nature, it's
amazing. So, in conclusion, Lynda, if you just want to tell us where people can find you online, if they want to listen to more of you and connect with you, and then in addition to that, I just want to thank you again for being so incredibly generous with your time, for spending it with us, and for letting us draw on your experience and knowledge of the continent. And then we'll wrap it up after you've told us where we can find you.
Yes, great. I'm on Facebook under Lynda Tilly, or myself and my Kato Mukasa from Uganda. We have an activism show where we discuss various topics happening around Africa. That's also on a Saturday, and it's our Facebook page is Call to Activism Africa, and you can connect with us through that as well. And we'd really be nice to look at having some kind of collaboration, a couple of shows that maybe that could be done. We can between the USA and Africa, where we can exchange knowledge and things. That would be great, because we love connecting with like-minded people in other countries, because at the end of the day, we've all got to work together for world peace and for everything we hope to achieve. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes, but every race, every religion and background, and have continents of people uniting. We're going to have to unite as humanity, really, at the end of the day. I mean, it sounds like pie in the sky stuff, but it really is. I believe it is possible, because we're more alike than we're different. And there are so many good people in this world. The evil and the people that are like in our governments and that are a very small percentage of people in general. We're all the same at the end of the day, and we all want the same things. So it's really great, and thank you for having me on the show. I do talk a lot, but I'm very good tonight. It's been great.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
We'll connect again.
Super. Thanks.
Thank you.